Let's get started for the morning. Our first speaker is Mike Boehlje. He's an ag economist from Purdue University. Arrived there in 1991, and the only thing Mike really wanted me to make sure you knew about him, other than those two items, was that he's a farm boy from Iowa. Give Mike a nice warm welcome. He'll take us through the first 45 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be with you here. Hopefully we've got this system up and running. Can you hear me out there at all? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Appreciate it being turned on. So it's a real pleasure to be with you, and what I'd like to do this morning is to visit with you about some of the challenges and opportunities we have in the agricultural sector. So let me just absolutely start so that you don't get some impressions from what I'm about to say after this introduction that I'm a doom and gloomer. I believe that agriculture has a bright future. If I didn't believe that, I'd be selling our farming operations in Iowa and Indiana. Okay? But let me just tell you the bottom line real quickly. What I worry about are the bumps in the road to get from where we are today to where we're going to be 2050 trying to feed 9 billion people. What I don't want you to be is roadkill. We have to be prepared for different times than we have today. These are not normal times, and we've got to position our businesses so that we have more resiliency, more capacity to handle times that may not be quite so resilient and robust for agriculture. So that's where we want to go. We want to talk about how you manage your business in this increasingly turbulent time. So as we've indicated, times have been good, right? We've had record incomes, setting record incomes 4 years in a row. 4 years in a row we've set record incomes. Agriculture has been very recession resilient. Most of the other sectors of our economy have had pretty significant financial stress. Unemployment rates pretty high, but we in agriculture have done well. We have low interest rates. We have very strong asset values. Okay, in fact, a little bit maybe too strong. Some people, including myself, might argue. We do have an increase in the debt load in this industry, which some people don't fully appreciate. The debt to asset ratio is down. But why is the debt to asset ratio down? Because we continue to value land up. The debt to income ratio, i.e. the money we use to service that debt, is not nearly up as strongly or has not improved as much as the debt to asset ratio. Debt to asset ratio for the whole industry is about 10%. In the 1970s, which we cannot ignore in this period of time, was about 22%. But as a matter of fact, we have similar distributional problems relative to that debt, i.e. we have as many, if not more, farmers, according to farm record data, that are leveraged above 40 to 50% in their farming operations. Makes us concerned. We have high capital expenditures, a lot of retooling. Farmers have bought a lot of assets, modernized their machinery and equipment line. That's good news because that's positioned us so that if we didn't have quite as much income next year or the year after that or the year after that to make investments, it's not as though we're having to work with worn out equipment, okay? And many of you have grown your operations very significantly. So we have significant better times than we have had in the past. 4 years of record incomes. Now what are our vulnerabilities? And that's what we need to really be concerned about. We have times now when we might see things like increased supplies from productivity, okay? And acreage increases. I'll come back to that here in a little bit. How much acreage increase in the world we've had. and how much we've even had in the U.S. that has moved from cotton and other crops into our corn soybean production. We've had a slowdown. We are concerned about the slowdown in demand growth. Now, I didn't say a collapse in demand. I just sort of said a slowdown in the growth rate. Okay? And in fact, there is evidence that the Chinese exports, our Chinese exports of soybeans, our exports to China of soybeans have actually slowed down. Okay? That is a concern. In fact, if you look at it in terms of the bushels or the tonnage of exports, even though our dollar value of exports is up significantly, what's happening to the physical quantities of exports, both of grains as well as livestock production over the last 2 years? It's declining. It's declining. That's a concern. Now, it isn't collapsing. That's also good news. Because if you look at the history of agriculture, you'll find out that when exports collapse, farm incomes decline significantly. Okay? We've got the potential for higher interest rates going forward. We've got cost increases that we've seen. Rents up. Land values up. Have you calculated what you have as a cost per bushel when you pay $400 an acre for land rent? One of the things we do in our workshops and seminars is put together an action list. So as you're taking notes or writing things down, go home, calculate the cost per bushel. The cost per bushel. You sell bushels. Farmers pride themselves on being low-cost producers. We'll say it again a little bit later. If you pay too much for rent, you have, or pay too high a price for land, you've locked in higher cost. And that's a real concern. That's a real concern. 200 to 200 bushel per acre corn yields, when you pay 400, and around my farms in northern Iowa, $500 an acre, and it ain't 200 bushel per acre farmland. $500 an acre, 2-year lease, $500 a year, all paid up front. What cost per bushel has been locked in? Oh, somewhere around $2.50, maybe $3 a bushel, just to cover the land costs. Think about $10,000 per acre land, only wanting a 5% return on your money, or maybe even a 4% return on your money. Even though it's your money, you want a return on it longer term. How much land cost have you built into that land price at only 10, somewhere around 2.5 a bushel? That's a concern. That's a real concern. Higher interest rates, someday, they will come. Okay? In fact, Bernanke on Friday said that he will see interest rates going up. He anticipates probably sometime after mid-decade. Or if we see inflation going significantly above 2%, or if we see unemployment going lower than 6.5%. Now, by the way, he made a really interesting implicit prediction when he said that. He said, in essence, we think we're going to be in a slow slog recovery until 2015, 2016. Because he doesn't expect to see inflation pressures above 2% for the next 2 to 3 years. He doesn't expect us to have a strong enough recovery that our unemployment rate is going to go down in that 6.5% area. He implicitly gave you his prediction of the future of our economic recovery in this country when he said we expect to keep interest rates low until 2015, 2016, when we'll probably have to raise them. Margin compression. What if we did get some softness in asset values? What would that mean for agriculture? And then on the financial side, a lot of farmers said, well, we have a lot of cash. We're going to use that cash doesn't earn any return, so we're going to use that cash to buy real stuff. A lot of machinery purchases over the last 3 to 4 years, as we've suggested. A lot of farmland purchases with that cash. One way we protected ourselves, or the lenders protected themselves in terms of the vulnerabilities they faced in the 1970s of loaning too much on farmland, was putting limits on how much they'd loan you for that farmland purchase. I don't know about your lender. My lender in Iowa said, if you want to buy that piece of farmland, that's fine. I'll loan you 6.5 on it. You come up with the rest of it yourself. Okay? $6,500. They put a cap on how much they'd loan. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a good idea for the lender at least, maybe not necessarily for you, but you had enough cash that you could make that purchase, maybe not you, but some of your neighbors. And so you said, well, if I have to bid 10 or 11 or 12 or 13, I got plenty of cash to make up the difference. So I'll just go ahead and continue to bid. What happened to your working capital when you used all of that cash to make the down payment on that piece of farmland? Certainly the lenders kept you from becoming more highly leveraged, no question about it, but you destroyed your working capital. The first line of defense against financial stress is working capital. And if you look back in the 70s, you'll find that that was the first thing that hit the fan. And then what did we do in the 70s? We said, okay, we can't make that debt payment. We'll just go borrow now from the lender. We got credit reserves. Land values have gone up a little more, so we can borrow against them. And what did the lenders say? We're nervous. We were nervous before. That's why we put the limit on. Now, we're seeing this land market not go up as fast or in pause mode. Will that happen? No doubt about it. I'm here to predict to you that land values cannot continue to go up at 11% per year for the last 10 years, at greater than 20% per year for the last 3 years. That is not a permanent phenomenon. And when those land values start showing some flatness or some softness, what do lenders do? They really get nervous. And all those credit reserves you thought you had disappear. Exactly when you need them. Exactly when you need them. Be careful. Be careful. Availability of credit, we've already talked about. And some of you might find that you even have something like a tax bill that you have to pay. All right? And that would not be good news for us either. So these are the vulnerabilities. So here, let's think about this. These are not normal times. If you look at the profit per acre that most farmers generate above all cost, from 1991 to 2006, that was plus or minus $50 an acre. Above all cost. Above all cost. Agriculture is a commodity business. And you don't get excess profits generally in a commodity industry. For the last, since 2006, 2007, we've had significant excess profits in this industry. And we expect we're going to go back to normal. We would have gone back to normal this last year, except what happened to us? We had a drought. We had a drought. What are the futures markets telling you today they expect for 2013 prices and 2014 prices? Now, the markets may be wrong. The markets didn't anticipate a drought. They showed much lower prices for the 2012 crop than we actually received, right? So markets can be wrong, but you have to be really careful to not bet against the markets too strongly. Okay? What are the markets showing? Markets are showing that 2013 crop is going to be probably at least $1, if not $1.50 lower in terms of prices than the 2012 crop. 2014 crop is showing even some further decline in prices. Okay? I heard a forecaster say last week, if we get 2 normal crops in a row, think about corn prices between $3.75 and $4.50. Just 2, not 2 bin buster, 2 normal crops in a row. Now, anytime a forecaster, by the way, tells you something like that, you ought to say, why? You don't believe forecast in this environment because nobody can forecast in this volatile environment. But you can say, what are the drivers, what are shaping this, so that you can make your own forecast next week or next month in terms of what might happen to prices. But the signals are not good for prices staying in the space they've been for the last 2 or 3 years. Okay? They ain't making any more farmland, right? Did you know 123 million additional acres of farmland have been brought under the plow in the last 6 years? 30 million acres last year alone. We expect 30 million additional acres this year. Not the most productive land in some parts of the world, but once they get that land into production and get its productivity improved, it will continue to increase supplies. We've had 20 million additional acres move out of cotton, out of CRP, and other non-corn, soybean, wheat uses in the United States in the last 4 years. We are significantly increasing the amount of land available. If Brazil harvests its crop this next year, which it appears that it's going to be able to get done this year, it will become the #1 soybean producer in the world. The #1 soybean producer in the world. Today you have to add Brazil and Argentina together to have them produce more soybeans than we produce here in the U.S. Agriculture is the economic development strategy of Brazil. It's at the highest levels of government, the way they're trying to stimulate their entire economy. Don't think you could say that about the U.S., could you? Embrapa. How many of you have heard of this organization called Embrapa? Embrapa is the U.S. Department of Agriculture research arm, the equivalent of that in Brazil. Embrapa. If they continue to grow their research budget for agriculture at the pace and the rate they have for the last 10 years, and there's no reason why they won't, they will, in 3 or 4 years, be the largest public sector research organization in the world. We've had that space since the 40s. That's a wake-up call to us. Can we compete with the Brazilians? Absolutely. No question about it. All I want you to think about is that we are increasingly finding significant increases in global production. And once that land gets on board and gets cleared and gets ready to plant, and if prices go down to, say, $4 on corn, or less than 10 on beans, how much of that land is going to go back into idle space? How much is going to be sitting and go back to pasture? How much of your farmland, when prices went down, did you not farm? Agriculture is an industry that's characterized by short peaks and long troughs. An industry where you have somewhere around 3 to 5, this, because of the drought, this will be extended this time to 6 or 7 years of good incomes, and then world production capacity expands, and we choke off demand growth, and we end up with lower incomes and lower prices, and it all depends on how fast demand growth picks up. because supplies do not adjust back. That's because agriculture is a high fixed cost industry, and I will lose less money by continuing to farm as long as I cover my variable cost. But since a high proportion of my costs are fixed and your costs are fixed, that's a characteristic of this industry, you and I will not pull back production as we get lower prices until they get well below the $3 mark, where we can't cover variable cost. We have to worry about the vulnerability in this industry. We have to worry about the fact that we have now good times, but the history of agriculture for the last 100 years, and I'd be happy to show you the studies that support this, are that we are characterized by peaks and troughs. I'm not talking about cycles in the commodity markets. I'm talking about fundamental peaks and troughs. We've been through 4 peaks since 1930, 40, well, actually 1910, 100 years. We've gone through 4 peaks, okay? 4 booms. 2 of those booms were followed by bust. The bust of the 1930s and the bust of the 1980s. One of those booms was followed by a soft landing or a slow slug. The World War II boom, okay, was followed by not the best times, but not the bust we saw in the 30s and the 80s. The 50s and 60s were that kind of trough period, but not a bust. The question everybody is asking today, will this boom be followed by a bust? I'll give you my judgment before we end. We need to recognize that we cannot continue to have these kinds of times. So, if you've got that kind of business climate, if that's the business climate you're facing, the question is, how do you manage in that business climate so they aren't roadkill? Let me repeat what I started. I'm very optimistic about the future of agriculture. I'm optimistic about it for 2 fundamental reasons, right? Number one, it's not growing population, actually. Oh yeah, we're going to have by 2050, we're going to have 9 billion people out there. Every agribusiness executive is saying we're going to have all these people that have to be fed. What's wrong with that statement? Who says we have to feed them? If they haven't got any money, we got a huge welfare problem. Right? Well, I am optimistic about agriculture is not because of population growth. I'm optimistic about agriculture because of growing incomes. China's income growing at 8 to 10% per year. India's income growing at 6 to 8% per year. And as incomes grow in those parts of the world, Asia generally, what happens to their diet? They go through what we call dietary transition. That's the fancy word for saying, I like meat. Right? And they eat more animal proteins. But what would happen to their increased animal protein consumption if they didn't have growing incomes that would allow them to buy those increased, more expensive animal proteins rather than vegetable protein-based diets? That's the issue. That's why we watch China so closely. That's why we watch India so closely. That's why we're nervous about what might happen in the EU in terms of a deep, prolonged recession. You're in a recession right now. It's going to continue for this year. 2012, 2013, a recession. Well, now wait a minute, Boehlje. You said India and China. We don't ship a lot of our stuff and exports. We don't ship a lot of our stuff to the EU, right? That's right. But 25% of China's exports go where? To Europe. If Europe's in a recession, pulls back significantly their demand for Chinese products and services, what happens to Chinese income? Softens. What happens to Chinese demand? They're an export-driven economy. What happens to Chinese demand for everything, but particularly food? Soften. That's why we're watching Europe real closely, because of the contagion effect it could have through China on agriculture. Now, a friend of mine, Bill Hudson, pro-exporter, says, Boehlje, you're wrong. That's not the first time I've been told wrong. Okay? He said, China's government will make sure its people have food. I think Bill's right. Bill's right. And they got the funding to do that. Except, what do you think the government is going to buy? Pork? Or rice? I don't know. I don't know what they'll buy. But my expectation is that they would not buy the same animal proteins with their funds as people with more money would buy. Don't ever forget it. Another 25%er. 25% of every dollar you as an industry put in the bank comes from where? Exports. 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 Look, if you could only watch one thing to predict the future of agriculture, to predict farm prices, to predict what's going to happen to this industry, you could only look at one thing, you would look at exports. Historically, strong exports for agriculture, strong farm incomes. Weak exports for agriculture, weak farm incomes. We've got to maintain our export position. That's why open and free trade is so important to this industry. We're twice as dependent on exports as the overall economy. The U.S. economy, only 12% of everything we produce in the entire U.S. is exported. We in agriculture are double the economy dependent upon exports. That's why free trade is so important to us. That's why all of the commodity groups have been working very hard to make sure that we don't have something mess up our trade position. Okay? We haven't taken the approach of Argentina, where the only source of income for the government is exports, and so they tax exports at 30 to 40%. No, we would never do that. Well, yeah, but we've kind of played around in that space. Remember the tire controversy? Tire controversy. What's that got to do with agriculture? Cheap tires being imported into the U.S., particularly from Russia. What do? We got to protect our U.S. tire industry. So we put a quota on those tires. What did the Russians do? Anybody know? They said, we'll fix you. They put a quota or restriction on our poultry imports. They were smart about how they did it, though. They said, your poultry products do not meet our phytosanitary safety standards, which is not challengeable under WTO. So just what I'm saying is that trade ain't all about what we do in agriculture. Trade agreements over in some other place, or interfering with trade in some other industry, has significant impacts on agriculture. Trade is essential. Trade is absolutely essential for the financial health of the U.S. agricultural economy. We've got to make sure we don't impede that process. We've got to work harder at increasing our competitive position. Good news that we are having a conversation now, particularly with the EU, in terms of broadening the export policy Good news for two reasons. One is that will allow us to re-engage on their ag policy, which is subsidizing their products into the market, as well as their cap policy with incentives in production. But it is a signal, I think, that trade has now come up higher on the radar screen of government, that we've got to have open markets. So, agriculture in these volatile times. What do we do? 10 things, real quick. What do? Number one, we think about who our customer is and figure out how to create value for that customer. Now, in a commodity business, that's kind of tough stuff to do. And by the way, when I said customer, I didn't say consumer. You don't talk to very many consumers. Your customer is not the person that buys the animal protein that eats your beans. Who is your customer? It's the person you have direct contact with. Now, it could be the local elevator. It could be that you've got a specialty bean, you move into some unique processing. How many times have you gone and talked to whoever's buying your stuff and said to that person, what can I do for you? What do we normally do? I've been guilty of it myself on my farm. Go complain to the local elevator because they're not open when I want them to deliver my beans. Right? Go complain to the local elevator because the lines are too long. Right? You know, how many people selling to a customer would say, hey, you're bad, to the customer? Find out what that customer wants, what they need. I've got a friend who produces commodity barley. Commodity barley gets paid no premium for the product. He went to his customer, which happened to be, in this case, a brewer. He said, what can I do for you? Could I produce a special brand of barley for you? Nope, don't want that. Your stuff you produce is fine. What problem do you have, Mr. Brewery? What problem do you have that I could help you with? I'll tell you our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is inventory management and quality. If you could be our just-in-time inventory manager. We got tanks, we got silos, we keep some, but we don't necessarily do a good job of managing the flow into our tanks. If we needed some barley, we would like to be able to call you and say, would you deliver in 2 hours? He said, I got the trucks, I'm no more than 2 hours away, done. He gets paid a 10% premium for every bushel of barley he delivers. Not just the call, but every bushel he delivers to them. Because he's become their JIT, just-in-time inventory manager. Wow. Have you thought about what you can do for your customer? Okay? What can you do for your customer? Think about how you relate to your customers, how you can create value for your customers. Okay? My friend in the barley business gets good premiums, and he says, there is one cost. He said, I kind of feel like I'm a baby doctor. He said, it's a 24/7 deal. I get woken up by a beeper at 2 o'clock in the morning. I got to have trucks on the road and deliver barley by 4. He said, and that's a 24/7 deal. Okay? So there is a cost, but a 10% premium on every bushel, it's worth it. It's worth that cost. Okay? Got to think about that. There's opportunities for value-enhanced products in the soybean industry. You got to think about how you can think about bringing those to market, et cetera. Create value for your customers. Focus on a strategy. What is your strategy? Okay? We get so focused on trying to make sure we get things done right on a daily, regular basis, we forget about the fundamental direction we're going with our business. Are you trying to be customer intimate? What's that mean? That means that you talk to your customer a lot. You have these conversations on a very regular basis with your customer and finding out what they need, what they want, how you can deliver product service to them? Are you focused on bringing new products into the market regularly? So you're on the bleeding edge of bringing new products and new technology into the market, right? Product innovation. Some of those decisions you'll make may not have payoffs, right? May be risky. But on the other hand, when you make enough of them, you take enough, do enough experimentation, the 5 or 10 or 15 of the 50 that you choose to experiment with have the potential for big payoff. Is that what your strategy is? Or are you focused on what's called operational excellence? What's operational excellence? You're going to be the lowest cost producer of soybeans. Then think seriously about what you pay for land rents. Because it's hard to be the lowest cost producer of soybeans if you've locked in 2 to 2.5 bushel per acre on your, in this case, corn cost. You cannot, or $5 an acre on your bean cost, okay? Focus on strategy. Number 2, increase margins, cost control. We've already talked about buying right, okay? Buying right, whether it be your fertilizer, whether it be your chemicals, whether it be your seed, whether it be your land, whether it be whatever, you gotta buy right. In our farming operation, I remember learning this as a kid. We fed cattle. I go with my father to the sale barn, 10-year-old kid. My dad would pull out his little black book, didn't have in it what a lot of little black books had in it. It was a set of numbers. He'd look at those cattle coming in across the sale barn ring. He'd look at his little black book, he'd point to a number on that black book, and he'd start bidding. And he would bid vigorously. And then all of a sudden, he'd quit. What's going on here? I didn't know anything about it. I was a kid, didn't understand this. Just fun to kind of go and watch the action. Another set of cattle come in, same thing. Sometimes he won. Frequently, he didn't. So on the way home, I said, Dad, what's in that black book? I couldn't quite see it. He said, oh, it's a bunch of numbers. I said, well, what do the numbers mean? He said, every time before I go to a sale, I look at what my cost of feed is. I look at what the price of cattle is that I think I can sell those cattle in, and I figure out how much I can pay for feeder cattle. In the cattle business, there is one truism. You go broke faster than any other way bidding too much for feeder cattle. Okay? You look at people who have been successful in this business, they have always been careful about how much they pay. If you pay too much for feeder cattle, you can't make it up through feed efficiency in the feedlot. And I worry that we haven't thought about that same issue as we're thinking about what's going on, particularly today, as we've already indicated, in the land market. Best management practices and technology are critical. Timeliness, make sure you're timely. Market your stuff. Market it. Don't just price it. Try to figure out how to enhance your soybeans with services, with things you will do that will give you some price premium above commodity prices. Increase asset utilization. You know, farmers have a tendency to feel that the only way they can control their machinery operations is to own that iron. Let me tell you again about our farming operation. As my father started retiring, we had 2 planters, 2 combines, pretty sizable operation back in those days. We needed all the extra equipment. We had to replace a combine and a planter. I said, Dad, at the age of 83, don't you think it's kind of time to slow down? Oh, no, we got to, look. I said, let's do this. Let's have somebody else harvest and plant and till part of our land. Let's have somebody custom farm some of our property. You still will have 1 combine, still have 1 tractor. We'll just have about 1/3 of our acreage custom farmed. Well, my dad didn't like it. Thought it was a dumb idea, but he's going to make sure that I had a chance to have my say, and then he was going to prove me wrong. And guess what? After we did it for a couple of years, had to replace the second combine and the second planter, and we did the number crunching. We found out that we could get somebody else to do our work for us cheaper than we could do it ourselves. Now, everyone in this room says, yeah, but you weren't getting it done in a timely fashion. I have to own the combine because I got to get out there and harvest when it's ready. That custom operator may not show up. Competition does wonders for timeliness. We had 4 custom farmers. When the first one showed up, the other 3 showed up within an hour. One of them didn't show up within an hour. The next year, we had 3 custom farmers. We had our entire 2,400 acres of farmland back in the 1970s with 6-row equipment. Yeah, harvested in less than a week because we had 3 or 4 units. We had to build extra dump space because we had lines at our own storage facilities, right? We've got to be more creative about how we use those assets. How many of you work your machine 24/7? 24/7. Look, I've got a friend in a potato business. He farms a lot of different locations. His goal during planting and harvesting season is those machines are in the field operating 22 hours a day. 2 hours a day for road time and maintenance. 22 hours a day. We used to do that when I was a kid. All of our tillage operations were 24/7. My dad had 2 sons that were able to run the plows. We used to plow back then, right? I never could figure out why Dad never got the night shift. Okay? And this was, by the way, before heat houses, before cabs and all that. It was cold out there, even with a heat houser. Okay? All I'm saying is we got to increase our asset utilization in this industry. The biggest problem for many farmers is they got too many assets that are not generating revenue. It's not their margins. I'd be happy to show you the numbers to support that conclusion. It's because they got too much money invested in assets that aren't generating enough revenue on a regular basis, whether it be machinery and equipment. That's why leasing farmland has values compared to owning, because you get a higher asset turnover. You might have to pay higher lease payments and have a lower margin, but the asset turnover ratio, as evidenced by the University of Illinois Farm Record data, make up for that lower margin. Real quickly, grow volume and sales. Increase your productivity. Think about joint ventures with some other people to get the sizes that you want to be able to get the benefits of negotiating lower prices for your fertilizer, seed chemicals, etc. Manage your money and capital carefully. Okay? Use debt when it's cheaper than equity. Is debt cheaper than equity today at these interest rates? Yeah. But be careful. Be careful when you use debt. Make sure you lock in your interest rates on that debt. And make sure you don't leverage yourself too much. Lease assets in many cases. Okay? Use time efficiently. Farmers are very good as operations managers. You know, if I were to go to an industry and say, we want to hire somebody to make sure it gets done under the worst conditions in as timely a way as possible, I'd go hire a bunch of farmers. Somehow they get it done. They get the crop in the worst of conditions. They get the crop out in the worst of conditions. How many of us has spent time thinking about how we're using our workforce? Are we using our employees efficiently? Have we got workflow planners? What I mean is schedulers, like they use in the construction industry, to say, when I've got 30 or 40 different fields I have to harvest, what's the right sequencing to do that? Where should I go next to move my equipment around, to move my trucks around, to move whatever? And using things like standard operating procedures. Okay? manage the operating risk. We have very, very good income potential right now for 2013. You can, on your farm, lock in somewhere around $150 an acre pure profit. That's not as good as it was last year, as the year before. But what's normal? Remember what I said up front? Plus or minus 50. How many of you have locked in? On our farming operations, we've locked in 24% of our beans and 23% of our corn. Okay? So it's not just I preach it, we do it. Okay? These are not normal times. And why farmers will let profitable ventures, any other industry would lock these margins in, at least on some. I'm not saying go out and lock it in 100%. No, that's not what I'm saying. And use a scale up. I've done this what I do on my operation, I lock in 5 or 10% at a time. I don't move this up in terms of one big fell swoop. Do some contracting and forward pricing, okay? Get smart. Use a crop consultant. Use somebody that can help you make decisions about your business, okay? Network with successful farmers. Look, one of your goals after you leave this meeting is that there's going to be 1 or 2 people in this room that you're going to say, he's a smart guy or gal. I am going to develop a discussion and a relationship with that person, not just because we want to talk about the latest basketball game or how Purdue beat whoever or Illinois beat whoever. Had to throw that Purdue beat in there. Okay? But we're going to talk about some of the challenges I have and he or she has in terms of running a business. Networking is really important. Think like a CEO. As I already said, farmers are good at operations management. They get it done well. But a CEO worries about managing people, managing money, managing relationships, whether it be with landlords or lenders or family or employees or suppliers or buyers. 5 categories of relationships that you ought to actively be managing. Write them down. Lender, landlord, family employees, family and employees, buyers and suppliers. Those are relationships that you ought to think seriously about managing. And a CEO worries about strategy. Where are we going longer term? How is this business developing longer term? So, the future of agriculture longer term, I think, as I already suggested, is very bright. Okay? I think we have reasons to be optimistic. I'm optimistic about the long term, just like I think everybody is. A little less concerned. I am concerned, as we've already reflected to you, something about the short term. Okay? We can, if they've got the money, we can fulfill the effective demand of this growing population. I'm not as nervous about our ability to do that as some people are. Okay? I don't think we have to do it by destroying the environment, by having a larger dead zone down in the Mississippi, which is what has happened the 2 years prior to this last year. Okay? Those are concerns. And if you don't believe they're a concern, try farming in the Chesapeake Bay. In the Chesapeake Bay, the government tells you when you put your fertilizer on, how much you put on, and the technology you use to put it on. Whoa! They can do that? You darn betcha they can do that. We ought to be concerned if we continue to ship nitrogen down the Illinois River, Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, and continue to have the dead zone in the Gulf, about how the government might tell you and me on my farm when we can apply nitrogen. Don't want that for a minute, okay? So, positive. Incomes are going to be, I think, adequate, maybe not quite as strong as they have been. The operating risk is increased. the tools are less effective. Heard on the way over that on the short list for sequestering, right, to get this budget rejiggered at the federal level is what? Direct payments for farmers. Direct payments for farmers. Okay? We need to be cognizant that we have a big bullseye when you have had record incomes for 4 years in a row. We have got now a bullseye in terms of trying to reduce. Will it have much impact on the total budget? No, but it's the signaling that they're looking for. Oh, we took some money away from somebody, right? Okay? Tools are less effective. You've got to be more careful about how you manage in these environments. You've got to have the financial strength. You've got to rebuild your working capital. You've got to fix your interest rates. You've got to reduce, it seems to me, your short-term debt. You maybe even negotiate a longer line of credit on some of your operations. You slow your growth rate and you maintain flexibility. Will we have a bust? We'll close with this. It all depends, to a large degree, on you. Most of the purchases of farmland have been made by who? Not outside investors, farmers. If we continue to bid farmland up at 10 to 12% per year for the next 1 or 2 more years, when incomes are going like this, I predict we will have a bust. That's not a hard prediction to make at all. That's just common sense. We have the potential for a soft landing if we don't continue to bid up asset values. And if the land market, when we start seeing some lower incomes, goes into pause mode, where we basically say, we don't have to sell it, we're just going to sit on it. I think we have the potential for a soft landing. But if we continue for another 2 years, what we have done for the last 2 or 3 years, the probability of a soft landing increasingly goes away. Thank you very much.